Okay, we are on 21a. Chaf Beis Amud Aleph. 22, I'm sorry, yes, 22a. Thank you. Chaf Beis Amud Aleph. Second line at the top of the page. So the Gemara made a statement yesterday in the context of defining the Rasha Aram, the cunning, wicked one, the one who has a unique sort of wickedness, for lack of a better term. So one category was someone who straddles the line of law, and in this way ruins it for someone else without violating the law technically. And the second category were the charlatans, the imposters, frauds, externally behaving like leaders and scholars, but they don't have what to back up with. They don't have the character to back that up. And the last in that category was this person who knows scripture, knows Jewish law, but didn't learn properly, didn't service literally the sages, doesn't know the background to the law, lacks the sensitivity of when and how to apply it, but poses as a big scholar, and everybody gives him accolades because he can quote the sources, but it's all dry. It's just straight sources without understanding the application, the background to the law, when it's appropriate, when it's not appropriate, and so on.
Is that case, in that case, is he naive and thinking he knows?
Okay, so
intentional?
It seems intentional. Meaning, if he was naive, then he's naive. You know, he's intentionally going around. The way Rashi puts it is
intentional in terms of his deception.
Yes. So Rashi writes, he is considered cunning, because someone who hears him review the quote, the Mishnahs, Kasavar thinks who Shabaki Batamim, that he knows the reasons behind the laws that he's citing. And knowing by Kavatim Decham, and they give him accolades and honor like a sage. So it seems like he's posing to get the honors. That's what it seems like. He knows he needs to review the. That's right. He knows he needs to know the background, but he's opting out because he can get away with showing off without it.
Right.
But in reality, this is a wrong way to lead. One needs to get to the depth of the background and the sensitivities, as we explained yesterday.
Is this essentially what Esau was doing with his father?
Esau doing with his father. So that I would put Esau in the category mentioned before, the earlier category, which is those who behave outwardly pious so that others follow them. I would put him in that category, maybe. Right? Okay. All right. So having made this statement about someone who reads scripture, knows Mishnah, knows Jewish law, but lacks the background because it didn't service literally the scholars, didn't sit and delve into the background of all the laws. So the Gemara is now going to analyze that a bit further, that line, that phrase. So let's begin. Second line. Itmar. We have been taught. So we like to point out the phrasings in the Gemara and the terminology the Gemara uses to introduce various texts and questions and so on. A number of times we've talked about the various different words used to introduce a question. Ibaya, maskef, mesve. So there are two terms, actually more, but for our purposes two, that the Gemara uses to introduce a text. So one is Tana, or Tanan, or Detanya, all the same root word, even though they each mean something else. The same root word, and whenever the root word is Tanya or Tana, Taf, Nun, and Aleph, then what's being quoted as Mishnaic age text. Then there is Itmar. It's been told to us. And when the word Itmar is used, it means we're quoting not a Mishnaic age text, but a post-Mishnaic age text from the era of the Gemara. And that's what we're quoting now. Itmar. We have been told.
So Tana, it means, right, like the Tanaim.
That's right.
From the Mishnah.
That's right. That's right. And Itmar is a Maraim, the post-Mishnaic era. So Itmar has been taught. Kara Vashana, One who reads scripture, Vishana, and teaches Mishnah, knows Jewish law. But lacks the service of the scholars. He lacks the background to the knowledge, to the law. The person we're talking about. So Rabbi Lezer is of the view, he constitutes, or he qualifies as, Amaretz literally translates as man of the earth. But what it means is an ignoramus. Now, being ignoramus is not just a technical term. He lacks knowledge, but ignoramus is actually a halachic designation. That's why it's a bad translation, ignoramus, at least in this context. It depends on the context. Sometimes amaretz means someone who's ignoramus, but literally means a man in the land, meaning a simpleton. Am haaretz. Am means people, nation, persons. Haaretz of the land. It means for someone who's living in a lower strata of existence, in an earthly strata of existence.
Kind of like a layman.
A layman's a way of putting it, but it's a little bit more than that in halachic designation specifically, because there's the laws of meiser, tithe, and purity and impurity. So that's right. It's a level of kashrus, level of kosher, right? It's similar to the questions of whose home would you eat in. Or do you trust their kosher? So will depend on the level of observance and the level of knowledge, right? That would inform you whether you can eat in their home, whether you trust that their food is kosher. So back in the day, there was another level to this, which is, did this person take their requisite tithe from his produce? That's question one. And question two is, this is what Rashi tells us in this context, is the person careful to keep the food pure or impure? Now, keeping the food pure or impure isn't the question of whether you're allowed to eat or not. The person's allowed to eat non-pure food. But it's a question of a kohen, let's say, who, whether he's going to be impure, whether he can go to the temple, and so on and so forth. It's all kind of ritual questions that come up if a person consumed or come in contact with impure food. So, says Rabbi Lezer then, this person who studies scripture and knows the halacha but doesn't know the background of the law, he constitutes halachically as a am haaretz, and thus cannot be trusted with the food he provides, because lest it be lacking tithe, tevel. The tithe has not been removed from it. This is called demai. When you eat produce produced by an am haaretz, where you're not sure if the person took the tithe or not, it's called demai, and it's got its own set of laws. There's a whole tractate called Tractate Demai, which deals with these laws. Demai, yes. There's a whole entire tractate dedicated to these laws. But Rabbi Lezer is telling us that someone who knows scripture, knows the law, but not the background, is someone who we can't trust. We don't know if he would take the tithe or not.
There's a category of people who are very scrupulous in tithing. There's a need for them. I forgot what it is.
Chaver.
Chaver?
Chaver means a friend.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, I would submit though that technically speaking, on the level of ignorant and not ignorant, there may be those who are ignorant, but are scrupulous with tithes more than this guy, who know less scripture, right? This person knows scripture, he knows Jewish law, but doesn't know the background. And we suspect of not taking the tithe. There are those who I would imagine who know less than this guy. We don't suspect them of tithe. We might see soon some categories like that. So then why is this guy not trusted? See, the problem with this guy is that in his arrogance, he thinks he knows the law. And because he thinks he knows the law, but in reality does not, he's likely to make a mistake. Someone else who's got the fear of heaven and wants to do the right thing, but he just doesn't know, he wasn't taught. So if he has a question about his produce, he'll go ask the rabbi and get a ruling. But this guy would not do that because he thinks he knows all of it, when in reality he's missing so much of the law because he doesn't know the background to the law. This is this is not what Rashi says. This is not any commentary saying this, at least not that I've read. This is my suggestion. That he, in a way, it's not his ignorance that we're worried about. It's his arrogance we're worried about, considering that he thinks he knows all the laws. In reality, he does not. And that would explain the next statement. So that was Rabbi Lezer's view. Rabbi Lezer's view is the person who studies scripture and Jewish law but doesn't have the background, is considered an amaret and thus cannot be trusted with his produce, because lest he didn't take the requisite tithe from his produce.
Is he also not trusted with purity?
Yes, purity, and
you won't borrow his tools.
If you're concerned about impurity, if you're concerned about if you have to go to the temple soon, or if you're a kohen, or something like that. Not always would a person be concerned with impurity. There were certain people who.
During the holidays.
That's right, during the holidays, when you have to go to the temple and so on. Okay. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani Omar. Rabbi Shmuel, son of Nachmani, said, Harei Zabur, someone who studies scripture, knows the law, but doesn't know the background, is a bur. Rashi says he is worse than an amaretz. Rashi doesn't explain what the halachic application of someone being a bur.
A bor like a pig?
No, a bor as in like a ignoramus. Bor, like B-O-O-R, same word in English.
Oh, that's a wild pig.
Right, but in English is also the word a bor.
Huh?
I'm pretty sure in English there's a word bor in reference to a
wild pig.
There's that, but it's also in reference to a person being ignorant.
I was just wondering if that was the word.
No, it's English. It's a Hebrew word.
Oh, it's a Hebrew word.
It's a Hebrew word bor, but it's also in English as well, like someone who's boorish behavior, an unrefined, ill-mannered person. That's the English translation of bor. Boorish behavior. Maybe I'm mispronouncing it. Bor. Anyway, bor. Rashi says it's worse than amaretz. It doesn't qualify exactly what the halachic difference is between amaretz and non-amaretz, but perhaps it's along the lines of what I'm suggesting. The one who's ignorant, and that's why you don't trust him because of his tithe, because he doesn't know the law. He's a bad person. Yeah, he doesn't know. There were those who didn't care, but then there's those who don't know. This is someone who ought to know better, but he's getting away with less because he thinks because of his arrogance.
Yeah, I guess you could.
But he should know more. That's why he's worse.
Right, you could put two categories of people who don't know the law.
That's right.
Ones that pretend they know the law.
That's right.
And act arrogantly.
That's right.
And those who don't know the law but are humble about
That's
it.
right.
And realize they need to go seek
That's right.
advice.
And that's why this person's worse than a regular amaretz. Regular amaretz, we don't trust the tithe. It's possible because he just doesn't know the law. He wasn't brought up this way. He doesn't have the background. Okay, we can't. People at home I don't eat. They're bad people. They don't know. They didn't grow up with the laws of kosher. They don't know what it means to keep kosher. They haven't been inspired to keep kosher. So I'm not going to their home, not because they're bad people, just simply because I can't eat their food. I can't trust them. But this person is someone who should know, ought to know better, because of how much he knows, because of how much scripture he knows, and how much law he knows, and therefore he's worse than the guy who just is born in an environment that causes him to be an ignoramus.
Right,
Perhaps this is what Rabbi Nachmani means.
He's humble about it. He's asked, "Did you take tithes?" He may say, "I don't know," or "I didn't."
Right.
So this person will say, "Yeah, I did. Don't worry about it. Lead you through the wrong path." All these examples are leading a person through the wrong.
Yeah. So in the laws of Demai, it gets into the questions of what happens when an amaretz tells you that they take tithe and what exactly the law is. So I'm not going to go down that road. But yes, this is the kind of person who might tell you, "Yes, I took tithe," but in reality did not, because he doesn't know the whole background of the law, but he thinks he does.
Leads you in a
Which can,
place.
that's right.
That's
right. And that's perhaps why Shmuel bar Nachmani says he is worse than amaretz. Okay. So this is the second opinion. The first opinion is that he's an amaretz and thus can't be trusted with questions of tithe and questions of purity, ritual purity. Now Shmuel bar Nachmani says he's worse, and we suggested perhaps why that is. Rabbi Yana says, Harei ze kuti, someone who studies scripture, knows the law, but doesn't study the background. This is a kuti. Now here Rashi does give a halachic designation for what's a kuti. A kuti. Kuti is often referred to in English as a Samaritan. But the kutim, a controversial part of our history, but essentially they are a bunch of people who, for the purposes of our conversation, we'll just say that they converted, but they converted under dubious circumstances. At some point, the sages, they discovered, this is in the times of Ezra, they discovered a temple they had in Jerusalem, and they went and destroyed it, and there was all kinds of wars between the Jewish people and the Kutim. And essentially, the sages treated them with like a lot of mistrust as to the validity of their conversion and whether they accepted the words of our sages.
They used to burn fires on the mountaintops to throw off the
That's right.
sighting of the moon.
That's right. They were part of that class of people who accepted the written
only
Torah,
accepted-
but not accept the oral tradition. So this is a person who studies scripture, okay, knows law, but ignores the background that the sages give.
Yeah.
And therefore, there's even a question.
Sort of in that
Yeah.
arrogant category of people.
Say it again.
They're in
So
that-
Rashi says that this person actually doesn't even believe in Mishnah either.
No. No
Now, the fact that he no oral tradition, but the fact that he learned Mishnah is because he wants to show off as if he knows everything. But in reality, if he really wanted to know everything, he would be learning the backgrounds to the law too.
he knows, but
And
he
because he
doesn't
did,
follow
one
it.
second, because he didn't learn the background to the law, that's indicative of the fact that he doesn't care for what the sages are teaching. And therefore, you can't even eat his bread or his wine. It's yain nesach or pas akum. Considering that this person is very questionable in terms of his foundational beliefs. So it's 3 layers. The first one is an ignoramus. Okay, the ignoramus doesn't know. If we can't trust him, eat from him. The boor is even worse because he thinks he knows, revealing another layer, making it even worse. And like you suggested, he'll tell you that the tithe was taken, when in reality it wasn't, because he doesn't even know the law. And the third is a deeper level. He doesn't care for the law altogether. Never mind he's arrogant. He doesn't care for the law, doesn't believe in the whole thing. He's just posturing. He uses it to posture as if he's a scholar. But in reality, rejects the whole thing.
To circumvent the law.
That's right. And therefore, he can't even eat his bread or drink his wine. This is Shmuel bar Nachmani's view. Sorry, this is Yanai's view. Rabbi Acha bar Yaakov says, even worse. Harezo Migosh. Who is Migosh? Migosh, the Gemara discusses elsewhere, were people who troubled the Jews. But essentially, they were witchcrafts. This person's witchcraft. Why is he witchcraft? Not because he's actually doing witchcraft, but because he's an illusionist. He's winning people's hearts by demonstrating his scholarship. But in reality, he lacks the foundations of what it means to be a scholar and what it means to be a leader. So it's as if he's a witchcraft, stealing people's hearts with trickery, with illusion. So it's really a deep level of malevolence, if that's the right word. And the Gemara now gives us further meaning to what this means, that they're like witchcraft. And this Rashi just says that at this point, Rashi says witchcraft because just like witchcraft steals hearts with illusion, deceiving the person, presenting a certain visual that makes the person believe a certain thing. So is this person doing that by quoting scripture and quoting the law, deceptive. A modern version of this would be J for J, Jews for J.
Right.
Using the law, using Torah to deceive people.
Or even worse, the Mennonites.
Mennonites go after Jews.
Mennonites describe themselves as Jews.
Do they really? I thought Mennonites were a version of Amish.
No, they have that. There's the Mennonite Christian, but there's like Mennonite that have a temple and they have mezuzah on the door. They have
Really? I don't know. Not familiar.
On the building.
Yeah, I'm not familiar.
I saw one in San Francisco.
No, I believe you actually. I'm not familiar.
Yeah, but that's crazy. I was like, I was walking. I was like, oh, fine, I'm going to show my shul. And when you see like first Mennonite, whatever, and it's like mezuzah on the door, and there's
Oh, wow.
Everybody's walking.
So that's what this is. So the Gemara is referring to them as witchcraftery, right? Using Torah law to deceive. So it's even worse than just arrogance, and worse than just disregarding the sage's words, right? So you have layers. The ignoramus, we can't trust him because he doesn't know the law. You have someone who's arrogant, thinks he knows the law, when in reality doesn't. You have someone who's, number 3 is even worse, doesn't care for the law, just using it to show off. And number 4 is using the law to deceive people. Witchcraftery. Migosh. So now the Gemara gives us even further understanding as to why we're referring to them as witchcraftery. Omar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Mistabra, it would seem to me to follow Rav Acha bar Yaakov, to follow this last view of Rav Acha bar Yaakov, who says that the person who knows scripture, knows law, but decidedly does not study the background of the law, it would seem to me that this guy is, as Rav Acha bar Yaakov put it, a migush, a witchcraftery, in that he is specifically trying to deceive people. Now I say this, sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah. And I say this, says Rabbi Nachman bar Yitzchak, the Amri Inchi, because there are those who say, Ratin Mogusha, the witchcraft mumble. That's what it seems like Rashi. That's how it seems Rashi is translating. They don't know what they're saying. Tani Tana, they teach teachings. And they don't know what they're teaching. Right? That's mumbling words, giving off this impression that they're saying some hubu jubu, witchcraftery, as if like they're saying something that's very important, but in reality, just making things up, getting everybody going ooh ah. So likewise, these people are quoting Mishnah, and everybody's going ooh ah, look how smart they are. But in reality, they lack the sensitivity and the knowledge. The charlatans, they lack the sensitivity, the background, the knowledge to truly represent what they are themselves saying. And there's the further deeper comparison to witchcraftery in the saying words that are empty and deceptive.
I wonder if that was a rampant issue.
It seems from a number of places in the Gemara that this was a serious issue.
People were using it to make a living from.
It seems like
blessings then.
it seems from the sages that this was a serious issue. And to a large degree, a lot of the establishment of Jewish behavior is for this. They added a whole bracha to they added a whole bracha to Shemon Esrei for this. They added a whole blessing to the Amidah for this.
Yeah.
It seems like it was a real big issue. Ezra dealt with it in the second. It seems like during that Second Temple period, this was a very big issue. The Second Temple period, throughout that whole period, until the Mishnah is written, and even afterwards, even until the Rambam's time, Rambam had to deal with the Karaites when he went to Egypt. But it seems like it was for many centuries, beginning with Ezra, at the beginning of the Second Temple, the Jews had to contend with articulating and formulating what it means to be a Jew and following with the oral law, and many different laws and rules were enacted to parse between true faith in Torah and that which is mistaken, including these laws of Demai, right? Including the laws, the treatment of the Kuti, all these different laws.
Demai is one of the books of
the Mishnah, right? I mentioned before, Demai is someone who we don't know, doubtful whether he's taking tithe or not.
Okay, well,
So you have to treat the food differently, and you have to treat the person differently because you don't know if you took the tithe.
and that whole book on Mishnah talks about that?
Yeah. So it seems like it was it's clear that it was a very big issue for centuries.
Yeah.
I mean, as you mentioned before, it even caused wars between the Jews and the Kuti, even wars. It was Hyrcanus, one of the kings, had to deal with this. Jewish kings.
Well, Hyrcanus was a Tana, wasn't he?
No, I'm referring to earlier. I think it's Hyrcanus. He was a Hashmonaic king from the Hashmonaic line.
In the
Yeah, something else.
Pirkei Avos, it says Ben Hyrcanus.
Could be the same one. I'm not sure. Hyrcanus was a king of the Hashmonaim went to fight with this. And this is all from memory. I haven't read this and looked at this in a very long time, but there were a lot of scuttles between the Jews and the Kutim. And throughout that whole era, the sages were really articulating and formulating and establishing, ratifying what it means to be a Jew in line with the true faith of the written Torah and the oral Torah that comes along with that. And that culminated in the writing of the Mishnah, in which it was all codified. And the Gemara and so on.
The Christians and all that happening around Ezra.
The Christians were one version of a breakaway.
Yeah, one version, sure.
Right? The JC wasn't unique. It was many people like that walking around claiming to be messiahs. Well, that's in a much later era. That's towards the end of the Second Temple.
Right.
It's not even after the Second Temple, after the Second Temple period, even that era, in which there was many. But it seems like it's been going for a long time. Many charlatans coming along and claiming this and claiming that I'm the fulfillment of the prophecy of this and I'm the fulfillment of the prophecy of that. The right way to serve God is this way. Even building temples. The Kutim built a temple somewhere else, not in Jerusalem.
The other nations had opportunities to attack because they had there was internal turmoil.
Lots, exactly.
Jews.
Huge fragmentation. Huge fragmentation. Yeah.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. But that fragmentation built up over a long time. It wasn't like the fragmentation
No.
just began at the end of the Second Temple period. This has been bubbling over for
Yeah, well.
for centuries already. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah. Okay, let's stop over here. What's that? We have more time? Let's go a little bit more.
However you wish.
Okay, let's go a little bit more. Our sages taught. Now we're quoting a Mishnaic age text. Before we quoted Ikmar, that was a post-Mishnaic text. Now we're quoting a Mishnaic text, which reads, Ezehu Amaretz, who is qualified as an Amaretz. Again, Amaretz is someone we don't trust him with regard to purity and impurity, and we don't trust him with regard to taking tithe. Now here, the angle is not going to be the charlatan that they described before, to someone who's learning and doesn't, but doesn't know the background and so on and so forth. But rather, just the classic definition of who is someone whom we can't eat in his home, not because he's a bad person per se. Maybe he is, but that's not the issue. The issue is that he just doesn't know the law. He just doesn't know what's what. So what would demonstrate to us whether he knows what's what, whether he's a religious Jew? Essentially, it's like I mentioned before, it'd be the same thing as me deciding who I go to, whose home I go to eat in. Well, I'm going to see how he behaves, and if he behaves like an Orthodox Jew overall, I can trust that his home is kosher. But if not, he doesn't. So it's nothing to do with his level of knowledge, but much more to do with his behaviors, right? Because it could be he doesn't know so much, but if he behaves like a religious Jew, then I could trust him to go to the rabbi to ask a question. This is the classic definition. So what's the defining marker of someone who is behaving as a proper religious Jew? And that way I know that he is someone I can eat in his home. Says the Mishnah text, someone who does not read Shema in the evening, in the morning with their blessings. Doesn't daven Shachas and Ma'ariv, basically. Doesn't do Shema in the morning with the blessings and Shema in the evening with the blessings. Right? After Yishtabach, we begin Baruch Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam V'Yetzer Ha'or. That begins the brachas of Shema. And the final bracha of Shema is Baruch Hashem Gal Yisrael before Shemona Esrei. Same thing in Ma'ariv. We begin Baruch Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Baruch Hashem Ma'ariv Ravim. That's beginning of brachas of Shema and goes till Hashkivenu. And then begins the Amidah. So someone who doesn't do Shema in the morning and evening with the brachas, this is a Yeremis. As Rashi says, because if you can't do that, then Imam knows nothing, and we can't trust that he's keeping a kosher home, that he's taking tithe. But someone who says Shema in the morning and evening, means he knows how to read Hebrew, he's engaged in Jewish activity. So if he doesn't know the law, he'll ask the rabbi. Right? So this is someone you can trust and eat his tithe. Divrei Rabbi Meir, this is the words of Rabbi Meir. Yeah?
Is Shema in the evening, like the Shema at Ma'ariv, different than the Shema Shalamita?
Yes. The Shema and the Shachris and the Shema at Arvis, that's a biblical commandment to read Shema in the morning and evening.
Right.
The Shema at night is a different story.
Okay.
The person goes to sleep and he wants to have Shema, that's a different story.
Okay. So here referring to
The Shema in the evening and the morning, we refer to Shachrit and Arvit.
And that's what the Mishnah is referring to.
That's what the Mishnah is referring to.
Right.
Someone who doesn't do those, this is someone in whose home you cannot eat.
Right.
So
Because he doesn't know anything. He really doesn't know. He can't even read Hebrew. He doesn't know anything. There's no way we can imagine that this person cares for keeping a kosher home. But if he does do the Shema in the evening and the morning with the blessings, then he's someone who's engaged in religious life, can read, knows at least the basics, and if he doesn't know, we'll go to the rabbi.
So
This is Rabbi Meir's view. Yeah,
this person then is not a Haaretz if he does this.
that's correct. He's not an Amaretz, even if he technically doesn't know so much. Right? Okay. This is Rabbi Meir's view. Chachamim say there's a different marker to decide who is someone whose home we can eat and who's trustworthy for tithe. Says the Chachamim, kol she'eina maniach tefillin. Anyone who doesn't put on tefillin. So if he puts on tefillin every morning, you see him in shul every morning wearing his tefillin. Okay, so this is someone whose home you can eat. You can eat from his tithe. This is Chacham's view. So Meir's view is saying Shema evening and morning with the blessings. That's the marker of whose home you can eat and who's tithe, who takes tithes, who doesn't. And the sages say it's tefillin. And Aza Imer, sorry.
They both seem equally good markers.
Okay.
I don't know if there's any more.
There are other markers we'll see.
No, I'm just analyzing these.
Yeah?
They seem both.
They seem both pretty basic.
very stringent for someone to take on either one of these.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? One doesn't seem to have any more.
Yeah.
Just from what I'm seeing on the face.
Yeah. It could be. I don't know for sure. I'm not learning the Mishnah there. We'd have to open up the Mishnah there and see the commentaries. But it would seem it's possible that they're actually. Yeah, there's other opinions also. You have to look up the Gemara and Brachos and elsewhere. It's not the subject of our discussion here,
No.
but it is possible to understand that each of the sages are adding. So if Meir says the basic is got to say Shema evening and morning. Then the sages come and say, saying Shema is not enough. You got to wear tefillin when you're doing it. And then the third opinion adds even more. It could be we can understand it that way. But again, I'm not learning that Gemara now, and I'm not in that, not in that sugya, not in that subject.
Caught my eye.
Yeah. So we have to look it up there and look at the commentaries there to really get a full picture. Okay, so this is opinion 1 is Shema evening and morning with the blessings of Rabbi Meir, and the sages say tefillin every day. It actually doesn't even say every day; it just says put on tefillin. I'm assuming it means every day. I don't know. Yeah. And Azai Meir ben Azai adds, "Kol she'en lo tzitzis bebigdai." Anyone who doesn't have tzitzis on his garments. So this is a person who's in straight up violation of biblical command. He has a 4-cornered garment, presumably. He doesn't wear tzitzis. Okay, so this doesn't have the string, right? So this is someone who he's certainly not keeping the laws of, or not certainly, but this is someone who we don't know for sure whether he's keeping the laws of tithe. But if he's walking around with tzitzis, then he's someone who probably keeps tithe in his house, or maybe even certainly keeps tithe in his home.
It sounds like that garments in those days were made with 4 corners.
That was a common, it was a tunic they used to wear.
Tunic.
Kind of tunic.
Yeah.
It was a common,
That was like the dress.
Yeah.
The everyday.
Yeah. Okay, fourth opinion. Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef Amar. Rabbi Yonasan, son of Yosef, says, Kol sheyesh lebanim, anyone who has children, ve'enim megadlan limud Torah, but doesn't raise them to study Torah. He doesn't give them a orthodox upbringing. And this is someone who probably doesn't keep tithe at home, or at least is doubtful. But if he raises his children to be learning Torah, he's giving them a proper Jewish Torah education, then this is someone who probably keeps tithe in his home. It's opinion number 4. Shema in the morning, evening, tefillin, tzitzis, and now raising children to be Torah observant and Torah learned. Acherim omrim, others say, 5th opinion. And this gets back to the original view we mentioned earlier, Rabbi Lezer. And this actually okay, look up Tosfos, there's all kinds of things about this opinion, but let's just leave that alone. 5th opinion, going back to what we learned earlier, which is even someone who knows scripture and knows Mishnah, but does not service the sages. That is to say, he doesn't know the background of the law. He knows the law. This is the guy we talked about originally. This is considered the ignoramus. So he says, afilu, even. Which means to say, I think, that's why I mentioned at the beginning, that these opinions talk about whether Shema is the marker, Tefillin is the marker, Tzitzis is the marker, raising children, Torah is the marker. All of those, I don't think are in dispute with the view we mentioned earlier, which is now being quoted again, that someone who learns scripture, learns Mishnah, but doesn't know the background to the law, is considered Amaretz. One second, let me finish my thought. I don't think it's a contradiction. I just think it's 2 classes. One is someone who just is not Torah observant, and therefore we can't trust his home. And the question is, where's the marker of knowing someone is Torah observant? So we have 4 different markers. Say Shema in the morning, Tefillin, Tzitzis, or raising his children as Torah studying Jews. That's the marker to know if he's a religious man and whether we can trust his produce. Another class is someone who knows the law, but is deceptive about it. Now, why do I think it's another class and it's not an argument? Because he said the word afilu, even. Even, meaning all of what you said is true. But even this guy is also not trusted. The word even at the beginning of a statement. It doesn't say acherim omrim, that what's the definition of an amara? It's someone who studies and knows the Mishnah, but doesn't know the background. He says, even this guy is Amaretz. That means to say all the things you said, I agree, those are all considered Amaretz. But even this guy is, even though he knows so much. That's why I think it's a new class, and it's not necessarily an argument. Follow what I'm saying? But again, we have to look at the Gemara there with the Mishnah there and see the commentaries there to see if this holds up. And I think in the context of our Gemara, this is correct. I think so.
I'm not sure.
Follow what I'm saying?
Modifying a different person, I think it just, this particular one is inclusive of all the other ones. And this
well-
one is a narrower, maybe not more strict definition of who.
Yeah, I suppose it's a more strict definition, yeah.
Because it's like, well, you could put on the film, but you may not necessarily know all the ins and outs of all of kashrut. But if you study Torah well, you study the Gemara, and you'll not only know about this.
So
it's like an all-inclusive.
Right. This is
More
yeah.
strict
It's so
than
stricter, so it includes all the others.
all the
Yeah,
others.
that's a possible that would I can accept that. But I think in the context of our Gemara, it's two
Maybe-
classes. I
Yeah,
like to
maybe
think
in
so.
the context of trying to classify different levels
Yeah.
of.
And again, the reason why I'm saying that is because the previous Gemara, which quoted all these sages talking about,
Right.
in other words, the two texts come from a different angle. The Mishnaic text we quoted asks the question, who's an Amaretz? And then goes through classifications. The last one being someone who studies the scripture, studies the law, but doesn't know the background. That's the Mishnaic text. So the question the Mishnaic text is addressing is, what is an Amaretz? The question that we addressed in the post Mishnaic text is, how do we define the guy who learns scripture and the Mishnah doesn't know the background? And the first definition is Amaretz. The second definition was bor. The third definition was witchcraftery, kuti. The fifth definition was witchcraftery. So the questions are different that they're addressing. The first question was, how do you define the guy who learns scripture, learns the Mishnah, but doesn't have the background? Question one. The first answer being Amaretz. The Mishnah we're learning is class. The second Mishnah is asking, what's an Amaretz? The fifth definition is someone who learns Mishnah but doesn't learn the background. So there's the overlap, but the question's coming from a different angle. You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's why I think it's a separate class issue, right? Here we're asking what's an ignoramus. An ignoramus also includes that guy, but that guy is of a whole different class because he's a whole different issue of which some people say he's a kuti or a witchcraftery, right? That's why I think there are two definitions. We're defining two things which overlap in the issue, in one issue. You understand what I mean? They overlap in the issue of whether we trust this tithe, but there are really two different issues here. One's the issue of who do we trust with tithes, and the other issue is, well, how do we think of this person who's walking around claiming to be a scholar when he's not? There's two different issues. They happen to overlap in the question of whether we eat from his food, but I think they're two different questions, and that's why I think they're two classes.
These are gradations of the cunningness of the person in mind.
That's right. That's right. That's
That's
right. Our Gemara is concerned with the cunning. We introduced a text about, in other words, the people we don't eat tithe from discussed in the laws of Demai.
Yeah.
Are they cunning?
Maybe.
Maybe, but that's not the point. It could just be they just don't know.
Yeah.
They weren't raised Jew. They weren't raised to observe Torah law.
But it seems like when you get to the last one, they are.
Because it overlaps. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Because it overlaps, which is why I think they're two. That's right. Because I think that's why I think they're two different classes. One is, who is someone who don't eat from his food? Included in that category is innocent people who are ignorant.
Yeah. And as you would.
But it so happens to be that even a guy who's cunning, we don't trust, even though he knows all this much. And that cunning guy has a whole other class of issue, which is that he's cunning. And to what degree do we count him as cunning? Even to the point of being a witchcraftery.
It's like same conclusion, but for different reasons.
Coming from different directions, and that way they overlap on the one issue of whether you eat their tithe. But they're really of two different classes, I think. This is, and that's right. That's why I think that's from our Gemara. Even though if you learned the Mishnah there, I'd probably come to a different conclusion. But learning it here, I think this is the right way to think about it. Because the way the Gemara, that's correct. But the context where the Gemara is set up begins with who's the cunning. But then we also introduce the text about the one we don't eat from his home and tithe, because the last guy in that category is our cunning guy. Following? Which is why I think the Gemara uses the word even. Because all you guys, you said before, it's all right. For sure, we're not going to eat in the guy's house if he doesn't put on tefillin. But even my guy, who presents himself to be all scholarly, because he's cunning, we're not going to eat his tithe.
Using the word even, especially this one.
Well, even because he knows much more than everybody else.
Right.
Because he
But
knows the
even
Mishnah,
though-
he
even
knows
though-
scripture.
Even
That's
though-
right. Even though he knows so much, he is cunning, and therefore don't eat from his tithe. Right?
Yeah. It's like
Even
different-
though, that's right.
Even though
Even though he knows.
Even though he knows all of this. So he's much better, he's much more learned than the guys you discounted before.
Right.
Right? You discounted the guy who doesn't wear tefillin. This guy's much more knowledgeable than that. So even though, notwithstanding all that, you should know he is cunning, and therefore don't eat his tithe. You want to know how cunning he is? Go look up the Gemara and Sotah, and you'll find out 5 levels of what his cunning might be. Right? That's maybe how to learn the Gemara. Okay, I'm going to stop over here, even though we're in the middle of a sentence, but it's still nonetheless, it's still a marker at which we can stop, because there's something that the Gemara is about to say that I want to bring about, which is going to be very interesting. Okay, looking forward to tomorrow, God willing. You have a wonderful day, Eden.
Yeah.